When you think of fascism before World War II, you mostly think of Germany and Italy, maybe Spain, but that's not quite right. In the 1920s and 1930s, fascism was fashionable and almost created a global fascist surge. Welcome to Between Two Wars, a chronological summary of the interwar years, covering all facets of life, the uncertainty, hedonism, and euphoria, and ultimately humanity's descent into the darkness of the Second World War. I'm Indy Neidell. In our early episodes of this series, we covered how socialism and communism spread across the world like wildfire after the Great War, and that launched several unsuccessful revolutions, and in many places, Red Scares took hold. In the one case where the socialist revolution was successful, Russia, we have looked at the horrors left-wing authoritarian ideology brought with it. Today, we turn to the origins of the authoritarian movements on the other side of the political spectrum, and how now, in 1932, fascism might be on its way to a global surge. Fascism becomes a thing when Mussolini rises to be de facto dictator of Italy with his flamboyant, bombastic new form of authoritarianism in the 1920s. This then influences many other ideologies that could be considered fascist, like National Socialism and a whole slew of different movements. According to some, even Stalinism, which at the time was referred to as Red Fascism by many other communists. But it isn't restricted to that. In fact, the 1930s were good times for fascism, with its ideas spreading like dandelion seeds in a brisk wind, carried through Europe, into the Balkans and Eastern Europe, France, Britain, the Low Countries, Scandinavia, Spain, Portugal, to the New World through Brazil, Chile, Mexico, and the United States. In the Middle East, Arab versions of fascism challenged the status quo, and in Far Eastern Japan, another version of fascism grabs control over society. Now, in 2019, fascism is a heavily charged term often used, or rather abused, to frame any country, political organization, or business that holds power. The expression has been subject to inflation in a way that's not really usable in a constructive manner anymore. George Orwell even wrote that the word fascism has no meaning except so far as it signifies something not desirable. Some academics have gone so far as to suggest not using the term at all anymore. And even in 1932, there are many different forms of authoritarian and totalitarian ideologies. But as with the example of Red Fascism, it is a term that lends itself to a biased definition from the get-go. Or, as political scientist Robert Paxton put it, everyone is sure they know what fascism is. A chauvinist demagogue haranguing an ecstatic crowd, disciplined ranks of marching youths, colored shirted militants beating up members of some demonized minority, surprise invasions at dawn, and fit soldiers sparring through a captured city. But fascism is, of course, more. And when you dig into it, some lowest common denominators define fascism beyond that, let's say, purely aesthetic definition. Again, we turn to Robert Paxton. Fascism may be defined as a political behavior marked by obsessive preoccupation with community decline, humiliation, or victimhood, and by compensatory cults of unity, energy, and purity, in which a mass-based party of committed national militants working in uneasy but effective collaboration with traditional elites abandon democratic liberties and pursues with redemptive violence and without ethical or legal restraint goals of internal cleansing and external expansion. As I opened, the first truly fascist movement fulfilling Paxton's definition is Mussolini's Italian Fascist Party that arrives in the aftermath of World War I. We've covered that and how it got its name in our episode about the March on Rome, the event that made Mussolini Prime Minister of Italy in 1922. But a lot of his inspiration comes from three French thinkers and activists. The first is French General Georges Boulanger in the 1880s. His Boulangism is a fiercely nationalistic and populist reaction meant to pull conservatives into a more extreme movement. See, Boulanger and many other Frenchmen feel that conservative politicians aren't dealing aggressively enough with what they perceive as France's core problems. They want revanche against Germany for the loss in the Franco-Prussian War and a restoration of the French monarchy. They want the anarchist and socialist threat to social organization dealt with decisively. They seek a return to law and order and an imagined greater glory of the past. Despite being monarchist, the Boulangist movement rekindles the sentiments of patriotism, egalitarianism, and popular vigilance. Boulanger does so by tapping into a deeply rooted French sentiment of revolution in times of dissatisfaction. And Boulangism soon wins a massive following. But to make a long story short, his movement flounders when he gets embroiled in some extremely salacious sex scandals. He's forced into exile in Belgium, where he commits suicide by putting a bullet in his head on his late mistress's grave in 1891. In any case, it can well be argued that Boulanger was the founding father of the first far-right populist mass movement in modern politics. Mussolini's more left-wing ideas are influenced by another Frenchman, the political thinker Georges Sorel and his Sorelianism. Sorel is influenced by socialist thinker Karl Marx and mutualist philosopher and politician Pierre-Joseph Proudhon. But Sorel believes that labor organization is the key to a Marxist society. He seeks a revolution of the proletariat driven by union action, which becomes known as syndicalism. But the central part of Sorelianism that Mussolini picks up is the power of myth. Sorel argues that a shared story, regardless if it is based on lies, falsehoods, or myths, is crucial in uniting a group of people into a movement. This belief in the power of myth and his strong anti-democratic opinions also influence another thinker. He will, in turn, eventually attract Sorel himself and Mussolini to abandon their leftist ideology of egalitarianism for a reactionary, hierarchical worldview. He is Charles Maurras, the father of integral nationalism. Maurras believes in militarism. He has a belief in ethnic assertion coupled with outspoken xenophobia and a deeply rooted anti-Marxism. But he also believes that some aspects of socialism are useful, or as he puts it, socialism, liberated from democratic and cosmopolitan elements, fits nationalism as well as a well-made glove fits a beautiful hand. He is opposed to liberal democracy, which he believes was responsible for degrading French culture by allowing Freemasons, Protestants, Jews, and foreigners to enter the French nation. Maurras's strong pro-Catholic and anti-Semitic views gained popularity in France in parallel with the Dreyfus affair, the case in which Alfred Dreyfus, a French Jewish officer, is wrongfully tried and convicted for treason. In reality, the crime is committed by a different French officer, Ferdinand Valsin Esterhazy, but Dreyfus is prejudged as guilty because he is a Jew and from Alsace, hence more or less German anyway. The trial and Maurrassian thought bring about the creation of the first really proto-fascist movement, Action Française, which will develop a staunchly reactionary, racist, and anti-Semitic form of nationalism and have a significant impact on a certain Adolf Hitler's thinking. Later, when Mussolini develops fascism in Italy, multiple French fascist parties such as Fachot, the Parti Populaire Français, Rassemblement National Populaire follow his model. A few factions will turn to violent terrorism. The most prominent of them is La Cagoule. All the way up until the end of the 1930s, La Cagoule will assassinate perceived opponents of the right. They will also sabotage any French efforts to aid the Republicans in the Spanish Civil War. Yet, fascism never gets as organized and centralized in France as in Italy or Germany, though the French movements will one day serve as a basis for French collaboration with the German Nazis. And it is Germany that provides the fertile ground for the reactionary components of fascism to develop into Nazism. Just like communism requires an industrialized society, fascism requires a modernized society in a modern nation state. Nations with a sizable portion of people fed up with what they see as the hypocritical and decadent liberal democracies of modern Europe that arose just before and after World War I. Here, fascism seeks a national rebirth. But you can only go back to old values if they have been there before, and if you feel like they are slipping away. This means that certain preconditions are necessary to create a perfect storm. The Enlightenment, democratic revolution, the Industrial Revolution, followed by the Great War, create precisely these conditions, and they are especially virulent in Germany. As the 1920s progress, it looks like Germany's on the path to genuinely modern society. Democracy with universal suffrage, civil liberties, a mass media boom, mass consumption, cult of the automobile, vibrant youth culture, changing moral standards, all aspects of the German Golden 20s. But the country is also wrought with political strife between extremes, a fractured parliament unable to rule effectively, economic hardship for many parts of society, eroding classical values, and perhaps most significant, a widespread and shared national myth. It is the stab-in-the-back conspiracy that Germany was not genuinely defeated in World War I and is being dealt an unfair blow through the effects of actually losing that war, which they definitely did. And in this divided society, this myth is seized upon in true Sorelian manner to whip up a movement of catastrophic proportions. The Maurasian ideas of race and anti-Semitism take this ideology yet another step. See, the Nazis imagined that the German race is embroiled in a secret war with Zionism. Thus, they transpose all of the things they see as corrupt, derelict, and decadent in society to the Jewish faith. They even blame the imagined stab in the back on the Jews. Those Jews who make up less than 1% of the German population, who are by no means especially dominant, and many of whom are secular Jews, and all of whom are relatively well integrated as Germans. Many Nazis, shall we say, stretch the definition of what a Jew is, though. Although it is still debated within the party, a lot of the more rabid anti-Semites consider even converts and citizens with some Jewish grandparents to be Jews. But following Sorel's thoughts, the realism for accuracy of a shared vision doesn't matter much as long as it can unite the troops. And although it fails at first to make Nazism into a broad movement, it is very efficient in creating a broad base of dedicated fanatics. Following Maurras lead, the Nazi movement is also extremely anti-Marxist, and yet they recruit large parts of their militants from socialist revolutionaries. Even the name of the political party, the German National Socialist Workers' Party, indicates the influence of traditionally left political thought on its origins. And in the 1920s, there is a sizable part of the Nazi Party and some German conservative revolutionaries who do pursue a Mussolini-style fascism. It's called Kehrfront, or in English, the third position. In the Nazi Party, they are the Strasserists, led by Gregor and Otto Strasser. But in December 1932, they are soundly defeated by Hitler's version of Nazism, which rejects Mussolini's statist and collectivist economic aspects of fascism. We'll get back to that in the next chapter on Germany. Instead, Hitler espouses an oligarchic economic model. He supports private industry and finance, allowing them relative freedom to act as long as they are aligned with the racist and nationalist goals of the party. Moreover, Germany has long adopted a conservative welfare state. In 1932, it already has some of the world's most advanced labor rights, created under Chancellor Otto von Bismarck in the 1880s. So there is not even a perceived need for more labor rights by most ordinary people. In yet another anti-Semitic masterstroke, the Nazis have also managed to channel existing anti-capitalist emotion into hatred of the Jews. They have equated Judaism with banking and capitalism. It is with this rhetoric, it sounds vaguely socialist, but is in fact only racist and anti-Semitic, that they have made themselves a haven for disenfranchised socialist militants and thugs. And such anti-Semitism is shared by many of the fascist movements. In fact, anti-Semitism is relatively prevalent in general in the world of the 1920s and 1930s. For instance, at this time, a poll shows that 41% of Americans feel that Jews have too much power in the United States, and 20% even want to drive Jews out of the United States. To put that in relation, in a similar 2009 poll, 13% of Americans thought that Jews have too much power. In 1932, when Hitler is about to seize power, there is sizable popular support for Hitlerism in the United States. At the least, it is seen as the right solution for Germany. But similar domestic movements get less support, and as the 30s progress, much of the Nazi support will erode when it becomes increasingly clear that Hitler's ideology is hell-bent on murder and war. Nevertheless, there are still multiple smaller movements aligned with fascism. Some are small fringe movements like the Black Legion, a violent sister organization of the Ku Klux Klan. Others are a bit more significant, like the Silver Legion of America and the German-American Bund. The Silver Legion is a white supremacist and anti-Semitic underground organization calling for a Christian Commonwealth. By 1934, they'll have about 15,000 members actively calling for non-whites and Jews to be removed from society. The German-American Bund, it's more of a support group for the German Nazis, as only American citizens of German descent are allowed to join. But all in all, fascism does not gain a serious foothold in the United States. The same can be said for Great Britain, also plagued by anti-Semitism. Here, several attempts are made to create a unified fascist movement out of several smaller groups, mainly focused on British national romanticism. Most significant is the British Union of Fascists under the leadership of Sir Oswald Mosley. He inherited the Sir with his baronetcy. Though the party has members in the low tens of thousands, it never gains a seat in Parliament. In the mid-1930s, most support vaporizes following violent clashes between British fascists and their opposition, most significantly at the Battle of Cable Street in London's East End. The National Socialist Movement, NSB, in the Netherlands has 52,000 members by 1936. But popular support declines when the Nazis in Germany begin showing the true nature of Nazism in 1938. In Belgium, the Flemish National Union, VNV, is founded in 1933 to advocate for reunification with the Netherlands. Rebranded Flemish National Bloc, it does gain 16 seats in the parliament, but then stagnates. In Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Denmark, Nazi-like parties are founded but fail to get any serious traction. In Brazil, a movement called Brazilian Integralist Action is founded by Plínio Salgado in 1932. It uses fascist aesthetics and mass culture, but rejects racism and actually has a slogan called Union of All Races and All Peoples. They have an unusual approach to nationalism, viewing it as a shared spiritual identity and not ethnic or racial. But it sure looks like fascism, with a green-shirted paramilitary organization. They are anti-Marxist, anti-liberalist, fighting communists in the street from the mid-1930s, and seriously destabilizing Brazil and causing a great many casualties. But although Mussolini-style fascism doesn't succeed in many countries, many places see a move towards extreme right-wing style authoritarianism. Perhaps most significant is Japan, which, as we saw in a previous chapter, follows something like fascism too, although in a very different way from Italy or Germany. Historians refer to this as military fascism, emperor fascism, fascism from above, or simply kakushin, Japanese for innovation. In some ways, it is very similar to Franco's fascism in Spain. Franco also depends on a significant military component, but in difference to Japan, it's more corporatist. That is to say, society is divided into distinct groups like corporations so that they can be easily ruled by a select group for the benefit of the nation. We'll see more of that when we cover Franco and Spain in a later episode. In any case, Japan merges military fascism with colonialism and imperialism similar to Great Britain and to a lesser degree France. In Portugal in 1933, the Estado Novo, or Second Republic, a corporatist and interest group-based far-right regime, gains power. It is the continuation of the national dictatorship set up in a 1926 coup that put an end to Portuguese democracy. Similar to fascism, Estado Novo is a reactionary and nationalist movement with great sympathies for traditional Catholicism. It opposes socialism, liberalism, and anti-colonialism, and is protective of Portuguese colonies like Angola and Mozambique. It is, however, also very different from Mussolini's fascism, especially in its more moderate use of state force. Antonio de Oliveira Salazar, the leader of Estado Novo, like Franco, avoids meddling in international politics or joining any international fascist alliance. This will help Estado Novo to stay in power until 1974 in the Carnation Revolution. So by 1932, many of the countries in Europe that became democracies in 1918 and 1919 have fallen to forms of authoritarianism. Poland, the Baltic states, Yugoslavia, and several others are now under dictatorial regimes, even actual dictators, or are about to go that route. In the end, the only countries where any kind of fascist movements managed to get over 20% of the electoral votes are in Italy, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Romania. Then, of course, there were countries where successful fascist or vaguely fascist movements did not use democratic institutions to gain power, such as Poland, Japan, or Spain. Add to that authoritarian movements on the left that arise through socialist revolution in the USSR and are on the march in many other places. And in 1932, it is pretty clear that the world is not on a clear path towards universal liberal democracy. So while there might not have been a global fascist surge, there was a global anti-democratic and anti-liberal surge, sometimes taking on the form of fascism. Thousands of people ready to abandon the rule of law, betray civil liberties, and deny the sanctity of human life. People that will not support any effort of their governments to resist the actual fascist surge. In Europe, hundreds of thousands of them will take up arms for an ideologically aligned foreign power. These people will serve as some of the most hard-boiled perpetrators of suppression, oppression, and mass murder of those they deem as lesser, non-desirable human beings. They will be the enablers. They will be the collaborators. They will be the SS volunteers. They will betray their countries, their neighbors, and their friends to fulfill dreams of superiority and glory at the expense of all decency, humanity, and respect for human life. If you would like to see how Mussolini creates fascism, you can watch our video on the March of Rome, which you can see right here any second now. Our TimeGhost Army member of the week is Hans Riding, or Hans Riding. Kanske, det beror på ursprung. No? With contributions from people like Hans, Riding, or Reading, we can surge ourselves and continue doing more content like this. So please be like Hans and join the TimeGhost Army at patreon.com or timeghost.tv. And remember to subscribe and ring that bell.
Anger, fear, aggression. The dark side of the force, easily they flow, quick to join you in a fight. If once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny. Consume you it will.